Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here, back to school season, classes in session. It's time for Word Balloon 101. Okay, back at our halls. Man, I'll tell you, this one conference hall probably needs a little polishing. Got to talk to the janitorial staff about that. But anyway, we are here today to discuss romance literature. This is a great panel from Terrificon. I didn't do it. Paul Kupperberg interviews Barbara Frielander. Now, Barbara was a writer and editor at DC Comics from 1964 to 1969. She talks about her career, lots of background information about DC in the Silver Age, and she dishes in a really good way. But we talk about the romance line because Barbara wrote for it, and she edited it. She also worked on Swing with Scooter and was involved with that. But mostly it's all about the DC romance line. Now, I'm in the audience, and you will hear me ask a couple questions. But, I always think that the DC romance years is one of the neglected eras of DC. Amazing artists, real attention to the fashions of the day. And, they're kind of hokey stories. And even Barbara, kind of in her own way, I think, basically says they were silly little stories. But in a great way. They were fun. And, my God, amazing artists, and some artists that don't normally come up in conversation are name-checked in this great discussion. Also some great letterers as well. So, this is cool. This is really great Silver Age history from a lovely woman that was part of it. Barbara Frielander talks to Paul Kupperberg about DC's romance comics of the 1960s today on Word Balloon. It's all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, very much for your support. You help me get to conventions. You help me update my equipment. And I'm trying to put out even more content than normal. And I thank you. It's in part because of the Word Balloon subscribers via Patreon. If you'd like to help out, if you can afford it, if you think what I do here at Word Balloon every month is, is it worth the price of a comic? Is it worth $1 a month? If you think so, join the League of Word Balloon listeners. You can go to patreon.com/wordballoon, or you can go to wordballoon.com and click on the Patreon ad. But I thank you very much for your support. League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon is also brought to you by InStock Trades at InStockTrades.com. Now, there are a lot of great collections of romance stuff at InStock Trades. What I don't see, and frankly, I don't think DC has, thought about releasing any of their romance stuff. But regardless, if you want to take a look at the genre, you can go back to the beginning and get Young Romance, The Best of Simon and Kirby, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 is 30% off. It's $20.99. That's the same price for Volume 2. And we do briefly mention in the lecture that Simon and Kirby were the first to do the romance comics. You can also get things like Torrid Romance, Wally Wood. Pretty neat stuff. This is 50% off, $19.97. Then even a vintage romance comic book covers coloring book from IDW. Pretty neat stuff. And perfect for coloring, man. I'm coloring now, and it is so soothing. I highly recommend it if you want an easy way to chill out. And I learned this from my artist buddies like Art Baltazar and Franco and Scoot McMahon. If you color, it is very soothing, and it really is. You can really just kind of relax and de-stress. So I recommend Vintage Romance Comic Book Covers Coloring Book. 30% off, $6.99. Just some of the great stuff you can find at InStockTrades.com. Check it out. You'll find amazing books at great prices. And don't forget, if your orders are $50 or more, you'll receive free shipping. They've been faithful sponsors of Word Balloon all these years, and I thank them for their support. InStockTrades.com. All right, take your seats. Let's get started. This was the actual first panel at Terrificon the Friday evening. It started at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and I was so excited to be there. I was wiped out from flying in early afternoon and probably would have liked a couple more hours sleep, but I really wanted to be there for Paul Kupperberg to interview Barbara Frielander about the DC romance comics of the 1960s. Here's that conversation now on Word Balloon.
Hello. Welcome to the first panel of Terrificon, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul Kupperberg. I've been a writer and editor in comics for a while, and our guest is Barbara Frielander, who is also a writer and editor in comics. But
thank you.
But back when you started at DC, and
I started at in D.C. at about 64. 63, actually. I just remember the date on the back of my shirt.
And you went to work as, did you go on staff as Jack Miller's assistant, or did you start as a freelancer?
Eventually, I landed as Jack Miller's assistant. However, I started out in the clerical department, which is not a place where people start who want to be writers. However, if you have talent, and I was lucky, they noticed I had talent, and they sort of let me do freelance work for romance books. And I was very, very lucky to be promoted. I had my freelance stuff was something that they liked, and Jack Miller mentored me, and I became his associate editor. And I have in the back of my shirt a funny caricature that he did of me. It shows all of the staff of D.C. And let me just get myself up. If you can see it, great. If not, you can come and look at my lookbook. You can see? There's the goddess of love. It's really not me. But I was so shocked. I have the original hanging in my office at home. And that's how I started. I started actually taking subscriptions for comic books. So I know the root from the ground up.
That's the way to learn the business. You know, if you don't know what supports it, it's hard to know what kind of books to do. And you started working in the Jack Miller was doing romance and
Jack was
humor.
doing humor, romance. He was able to do superhero stuff. I could not, because I never read the superheroes that you love, but I did know a little bit about love. And that's where I tried to put most of my emphasis, on love. However, as time went on, we tried to reach out to Archie Comics and do a similar thing. We did Swing with Scooter, which lasted a number of comics, and I worked for a couple of other people as well.
You were there, I was just talking to Roy Thomas earlier, and he said that you don't remember this, and he barely does, but that you two shared an office for about a week before Mort Weisinger drove him out in despair, and he went to work for Marvel.
Mort Weisinger was notorious.
Mort was the editor of the Superman line.
He was treacherous. He was, he just was not a nice person, and he could drive any creative person crazy.
Just to give you an example, Julie Schwartz, who was his best friend, another editor at DC in those days, they'd been friends since high school. After Mort died, Julie said, you know what they're going to put on Mort's tombstone? And I said, no, Julie, what? Because I'm a good straight man. And Julie said, here lies Mort Weisinger. And lies and lies. And that's his best friend. So
It's true. It's true. I worked in an office with E. Nelson Bridwell. Who
I love Nelson.
I loved Nelson. He was the most wonderful... he was an expert on Batman, Superman. He knew everything.
The Bible, Shakespeare.
He was there for everything, and he was so serious about it.
Yeah.
And he loved it, and he was so tortured by Mort. He really was. It was so unfair.
Yeah.
It was cruel. But Julie was much nicer. Much nicer. So I worked in the office with Jack Miller, E. Nelson Bridwell. I don't know what the E stands for. Do you?
Edward, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also Carmine Infantino. You all know Carmine? He was a very tall, commanding kind of guy.
Crusty.
Well, people didn't want to be crusty to me. I was lucky.
Well, you were kind of a rarity in the comic book industry in those days. A woman in editorial.
That's true. It's absolutely true. And I never said this in any interviews, but I'm going to tell you, because you are comic book aficionados. A lot of people didn't like the idea that I was a woman in comic books. It was difficult. The artists were not necessarily on my side because I liked certain artists and I didn't want to necessarily give a lot of them their work. So they resented me for that. But my favorites were Tony Abruzzo. Do you know Tony? Terrific. And Scott Pike, who were wonderful. I worked with other people too, but I loved those particular men because I thought they hit exactly what girls were looking for. Beautiful men, gorgeous ladies, and a situation maybe they could get themselves into, and in the end have happiness, flowers, and joy forever.
Yeah, there was a formula to those things, and
yes.
But there was an incredible roster of artists on those books in those days. I mean, Gene Colan and
yes.
John Romita Sr. and
yes.
J. Scott Pike, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
They were just, and a lot of them were working at Marvel simultaneously under pseudonyms. Was that an open secret? Did everybody know that while Gene Colan was drawing romance comics, he was also doing Submariner for Stan?
You couldn't sort of jump ship, so it was an open secret.
An open secret.
Yeah. If you got somebody who was a real meanie and didn't want you to do the work, they were ratting on you. I mean, it's like any other business that you go into.
Worse.
Yeah. Okay.
And, the thing you said about the men resenting you, that hasn't changed in this business, unfortunately.
No, it hasn't.
You hear it from women, and I worked in DC's offices for 16 years, and I saw many things, and a lot of stuff that came out in the news in the last couple of years was not a surprise. What is a surprise is some of the news that hasn't come out yet. But
right.
I don't know what do you think is what's our problem? Why do guys have such a problem? I mean,
I think that they seem to think of women as appendages that can do certain skills. That's what they thought of then. And it's true. I succumbed to that. In the end, I could have stayed at D.C. They really wanted me to stay, but I left because I wanted to get married, just like the heroes and heroines in my book. I was an idiot. Because that's what the time demanded. By 1969, I was married. So I think that men seem to think of women in certain roles, and when they lift themselves up, it's, they get pushed down a little bit. So you have to really get up there and show them your stuff. And if you can do it without a chip on your shoulder, that's pretty difficult.
Yeah.
Pretty difficult.
Well, and you were in the romance. Romance comics are not a big thing anymore. I published.
Let me just.
Please.
Who here saw the movie with the fish? What was The Sound of Water? Shape of Water. Isn't that a love story? Isn't that a gorgeous love story? So, don't tell me.
Yeah, no, I just, but in comic books.
No, in comic books it could never.
I have a small comic book press with some friends. We publish our own stuff. And I did 2 issues of a romance comic, True Romances, and a Secret Romances, excuse me. And it was a lot of fun. It was kind of postmodernistic, my slogan was, happily ever after isn't what it used to be.
No.
But it's a hard sell. I actually pitched it to DC and Dark Horse and a whole bunch of companies, and their response to me was, well, nobody's doing, romance comics don't sell.
No,
but nobody's doing romance comics, so how do you know?
I don't know if we hit the right audience yet. Think of yourselves as going to buy a romance book. How many here would go and buy a romance book? Anybody in this audience? Besides 2. Okay. I know the boys over there wouldn't do it. But girls today are into hockey and baseball.
As well they should.
And they may not have time for that. They're so scheduled.
I'm from I grew up in the era where the only way they got me to play with a doll was to call it G.I. Joe, call it an action figure, and stick a gun in its hand.
Right.
But I was still
exactly.
playing with a doll. And, I'd grown up to a state where when my son, who was born in 1996, wanted a doll, it was like, okay, fine, he can have a doll. That's no big deal. In fact, I didn't get him a gun. I didn't want him to have a toy gun.
A lot of people did not.
So, so I don't, I guess I just kind of, I'm an old 60s lefty, and I'm just always hoping for the, that we will have that kumbaya moment. And, it's like, no, it's okay. You can play with dolls. You can read superhero comics. It's for everybody. It's not just
I agree with you.
Gender thing.
I would like to think, I would love to be able to write a modern comic book. I really would, and I would do it like The Shape of Water, or, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I would do it quite like that because a little bit out of reality. But reality is a very strange thing right now. So it's difficult to say what will sell. I have to agree with you.
Yeah.
What's going to sell and what's not going to sell. The most important thing is distribution, and that I did learn at DC because they had their own distribution. So that's a very important thing, is to where you can bring your books to sell and put them on display.
Right. They're not out there for popular consumption anymore. They're a specialty item. You have to go to a specialty store to find them.
Really?
For them. Yeah. You don't walk into a candy store or drugstore and see a comic spinner rack anymore. Those have been gone for decades.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So it's so only people looking for comic books are going to buy comic books. So
I agree. Yeah.
Anyway. So again, I mentioned some of the artists you worked with, and I know the people on staff. I know a lot of the people who were there: Saul Harrison and Jack Adler. And
Saul was wonderful. He was a wonderful character. I loved him.
He was a great character. Although I will relate to you something he once said to me, which was, "I didn't care for your brother, and I'm not crazy about you either." So,
well, Saul could do that.
Yeah, no, I know.
Saul could do that. He was very outspoken and very into everything.
Yeah.
Every department, everything.
He was the production manager at DC Comics, and he and a guy named Jack Adler, who was a production genius. Most of the special effects you saw in comic books, the wash covers, or you remember the 25th anniversary statue of Superman on the cover of the 80-page giant? That wasn't silver printed. That was done. That was a process that Jack was able to get through, to figure out.
Yes.
And these guys ran the production department, and there were brilliant people working there. There was Joe Letterise.
Oh God, they were wonderful. Walter Hurlachek, I remember.
Yeah, Walter and
all these people were there, and they just did that work. They did it so meticulously. I have to tell you a funny story. I really don't type well. I'm a lousy typer, and I must have been dyslexic or something, but I used the word yacht in my book. One of my books, I had a story, a continuing drama, and I spelled yacht every single time. I stopped correcting it because they corrected it for me. They laughed at me.
That's what Goethe was there for.
Well, Goethe was in the clerical, but Goethe was everywhere. Goethe was wonderful.
There was a little German woman named Goethe Cattell.
Yeah, she lived through the Holocaust.
Sweetheart. Yeah, she was the sweetest woman. I remember she was the librarian at one point. She was the proofreader. She was working in subscriptions.
She did
everything. Yeah.
She could do it. When I was there, she was, I think, Mr. Donenfeld's secretary.
That could be, yeah.
Yeah, she was that. But she was so capable, she could have done anything.
Yeah.
Really.
Very, very nice woman. It was an amazing place. I was lucky enough to. I went up there the first time in 1968. They used to give tours, weekly tours. You could go up. Walter gave. Although the first one I went on, Walter must have been out because Sal gave it.
Oh.
But and I met Len Wein and Marv Wolfman. They were also taking the tour, and they were still fans. But there was amazing people up there. There was. A bunch of them were still there. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name. The letterer, Milt Snapin.
Oh, God, he was wonderful, Milt Snapin.
Yeah.
He was ancient. You're talking about the ancient?
I'm talking about the ancient Milt Snapin.
Yeah, oh, God, he was wonderful. He had worked on silent movie posters. Do you know that?
Yeah.
He was so good at what he did, and he could tell you stories that they had to push you out of the production room because he was just... You look at this little man, you never know what, you don't know what people have lived through, and he lived through new creative people. He was wonderful.
There was, and of course I'm blanking on his name at the moment, but around the post office building in New York City.
909 Third Avenue.
Well, no, I'm talking about the post office building in 34th Street.
Yes.
The inscription, neither rain nor sleet, or whatever it says, the stone inscription around...
Stop this.
That was a DC. That guy became a DC Comics letterer. It's not Joe Letterer. It was.
I can't think of.
I'm blanking on his name, and that's a shame because he was brilliant letterer. He did all of DC's advertising and display lettering and the cover lettering and all that because he just, he was just so spot on.
Precise,
But this guy went from designing important architectural features to comic books. It was.
They were creative people.
Yeah.
Very, very creative people.
Yeah.
And if you have that within you, use it. Don't let it die. Use it. Really. Even if you're planning a birthday party, just go out there and use it. Make somebody happy. That's the way to do it.
There's art in everything.
There's certainly
there's a show about these barn builders, or they take down old barns, and there's this scrawny little guy who runs the forklift. And it's like, watch this guy dismantle a barn with this forklift and just take these timbers apart, and you go, you know what, I don't care that he's driving a forklift, this guy is an artist. He's doing a work of art.
Everybody has art in them. They just have to use it.
And speaking of art, I want to talk a little about Swing with Scooter.
Yeah.
Because Swing with Scooter was a teen comic that debuted in, 65? 66?
Around that time, yeah.
And Scooter was obviously, there was...
This is the first page, the first.
They were, you're obviously playing off of Paul McCartney and the Beatles.
Yes. Which, after the first couple of issues, sort of got played down.
Yeah.
But we were... Obviously, who does this look like? Archie, a little bit, a cousin of Archie.
Sure. But it was a slightly more realistic style than the Stan Goldberg.
Thank you. Yes, I wrote that.
I know that. This is why I bring it up. You wrote and co-created it with Jack Miller.
Yes.
And you had working for the first 2 years the incredible Joe Orlando.
Oh God, I love Joe.
I'm sure if you don't know the name Joe Orlando, you should look it up. Joe was a brilliant artist and my favorite evil imp in the world.
He was wonderful. He was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
He married a friend of mine.
Oh, okay.
He did. Wasn't happy, but
she wasn't or he wasn't.
He had one son that I know of, and he adored that son. Yes.
I worked with Joe several times. He was my editor on several projects and my boss for a little bit. And I loved him. He was, if he started on you, if he went after you, he could be merciless. But if you were in on the joke, it was hysterical, and you were his best friend. It was evil, it was wrong, but Joe just did that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you a story, and this story is going to appear in Alter Ego. I have to tell it because when Joe Orlando drew for Mad Magazine, they had, and if you have any of those old issues, it's wonderful to look at because he was so creative. However, every year Mad Magazine took a trip someplace. And one year they had one person who subscribed to them in Haiti.
That's right.
So they decided they would all go to Haiti to get this kid to sign up. And they went to Haiti, and that was the time when Papa Doc Duvalier was there. Do you remember him? He was not a very nice man. People were scared of him. And make a long story short, Joe and a couple of his friends were riding in a taxi, and also, all of a sudden, the Tom Makut, is that what you... jumped out, stopped the cab, opened the back of the trunk, pulled out Joe and everybody else, and in the back were all these pamphlets against the Papa Doc. And they never saw the driver again. They were asked to leave the country, and they couldn't get out of there fast enough. But that was a Joe Orlando story. He was very proud of that story. I would have been scared out of my mind, and I'm sure he was.
I'm sure he was, but there was something that fans have been curious about for a long time, and I don't know if you can answer it. There were about 3 months. There were different house ads running for Scooter, and it shared, I think, with Dead Man. No,
yeah,
no. But it was advertised as being in Showcase.
I have no idea why. Okay. Because I had no control over distribution or advertising.
Yeah. But it had originally, it looked like it was supposed to debut as a feature in Showcase, like a 3-issue thing.
I don't think it ever did.
No, it didn't. It switched
because
instead.
I have other issues here, and I can tell you it.
No, I know it didn't. But that was the question. There was like 3 months worth of house ads, and then suddenly the number 1 came out instead of Showcase number 60, whatever.
I don't know. Maybe they were saving money. They often did that. They often scared people to death because they were this little company. This was not taken over yet by Time Warner.
Right.
So they would scare people on a regular basis. If you don't do this, you don't do that, you're not doing it the way we like it, you're out. And that was not, a good way to live under the gun. I don't know if it was like that when you were there.
No, it wasn't when I was there. I hear it's like that again.
I can believe that because there are so many creative people there.
It's not usually the really creative ones who get to drive the bus. It's usually the bosses of the really creative ones who try to drive the bus. And there are a lot of bus accidents.
Agreed.
Anyway, Joe had, he was a brilliant science fiction and mystery and horror artist, and he'd just been he did Inferior 5 first, Nelson's...
He did. I have a copy of Inferior 5. It's very hard to find Inferior 5.
Yeah, it is.
Jack Miller and... maybe I won't find it. I don't know.
But that was written by Nelson and drawn. It was a it was a superhero parody.
Yeah.
They had
Inferior 5.
They had Awkward Man and White Feather.
I think Joe drew this one. He did.
That's Joe's. Yeah.
He drew this.
And then I think Sikowski took it over when he left. And you work a lot with Mike Sikowski?
I don't recall working with him. I know Jack worked with a lot more people than I did. Yeah,
it's interesting because Sikowski is one of those people that I don't think there's a lot known about him in fandom. He's like one of these kind of, you hear all these kind of stories about him. I've seen some pictures of him. He looked like a really rough guy with rolled up sleeves and drawing a semi-nude model or something like that.
Yeah, there were John Broom is the name I remember.
He worked for Julie mostly.
Yeah. He was a great friend of Jack Miller's. There are a lot of people, that are floating around in the back of my mind that I cannot remember. But I have to tell you, going back to what you said originally, I had never felt really. I was scared all the time when I was working there. I have to tell you, because of that policy of, you have to be at your best all the time. But I never felt intimidated by anyone, really. I mean, except for the artists occasionally that would, voice their opinions.
They tried that with male editors, too.
Yeah, I never felt that way. I always felt comfortable and very safe being at D.C. So why did I leave?
To get married.
Yeah, to get married. I can tell you something very interesting. I know how much they wanted me to stay because they sent me for a weekend to Sheldon Mayer.
Wow.
Sugar and Spike. Anybody ever read Sugar? Adorable. Absolutely the cutest. And I spent the weekend, and I dragged my mother with me because they said you could bring your mother. So I did. And it was really an informative, wonderful weekend. He had very bad eyes, and then finally he had an operation which allowed him to really work again.
Yeah, he had to work. He had to give up cartooning for a while because of his eyes.
Yes.
But I have about 120 pages of Sugar and Spike comics, Xeroxes of those that were mostly published overseas, so didn't get published in this country. But and also his granddaughter is around. And she's been.
Oh, is she?
Yeah. She's been working on helping bring him back because people remember him.
I think that was the most adorable thing. I think that could play well.
Well, and besides Sugar and Spike, and besides Scribbly, which he did in the 40s, which was a comic strip about a boy cartoonist, much like himself.
And wasn't it about a dog also?
Scribbly?
Yeah.
No, there was Ma Hunkel and the Red Tornado.
Okay. For my time.
Yeah, but he was also the editor. He was like 19 years old when he was an editor at DC in 1938 when he, got Siegel and Schuster's Superman and went to the bosses and said, "Hey, we should publish this." So this guy, and through the 1970s and maybe even to the early 80s, he was still consulting at DC. They were still after him for his advice and opinion about how to do things.
They respected him.
He was a brilliant writer.
Yeah, he was wonderful.
He was doing state-of-the-art superhero comics in 1968 when none of the other guys from the 1940s could match that level.
That's true.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Scooter and the other teen humor books, they were all done, like I said, in a slightly more realistic style than the Archie stuff. But after in 1968, everything suddenly switched over to the Stan Goldberg and was that like
I think what happened was, and I didn't bring an example of it, but I'm going to show you this cover. This is a very, very pretty cover. It's one of the artists that I said. It's either Scott Pike or Tony Abruzzo. It's a very, very beautiful cover. What they did was, when Carmine came aboard, they started to make women have muscles, and which is a good thing. But they also had edgy faces, and they were not exactly females. They were more. They had a tone of masculinity. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it was not part of my philosophy of doing things. And that was after I left. I had a certain style or whatever of doing things. They had their own style. It worked for them. What worked for me, everybody is entitled, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's so you weren't involved in that when the style switched over because they used to do it used to be like book length stories and
I did several chapter stories, which I love doing because I used to love soap operas. So
I was going to get to that.
Oh, okay. I love doing that, and I used to watch it with my friends, soap operas, As the World Turns, The Edge of Night, all the good ones. So I thought girls would like that too. And they ran for quite a while, so I'm sure girls did like it.
Well, there was in Secret Hearts and Heartthrobs.
Yes.
You did the Reach for Happiness, which was Jack Miller and Gene Colan, and Three Girls, which you did with J. Scott Pike.
Right.
You just said what motivated them. You just thought that would be a...
That's what I did, yes. Also, I loved old movies.
Yeah.
So I was a big fan of old movies. And I think I tried to put a little of that into the stories because...
Gene Arthur never heard anything.
Right. Little Betty.
Bob Kanigher, was he doing the romance books at that time, or was that later?
No, that was later.
Okay, because he was editing the war comics with Joe
mostly
Kubert.
The war comics.
Right,
yes.
but later on, I think he took over the editing the romance books.
I think
And
Joe Orlando did too. Joe Orlando.
It could be Joe and Bob. Yeah.
When I left and I was doing a little freelance work, I had to submit stuff to Joe, and I sat down and he said to me, "Barbara, now you have to do a whole outline, and it's hard to work with a complete outline, but that's the way they wanted it." So.
Yeah. So these.
I can tell you something funny that Saul.
Please do.
Harrison told me in one of these serial things, the lettering department. It was called Reach for Happiness, and they called it Reach for Penis, which they thought was very. What do you have on Reach for a Penis?
There was a lot of profanity in the production department.
Yes, there had to be. My God, they had to have some humor in what they were doing. And you were not allowed to use the word flicker because it would bleed into...
Or the name Clint.
Right. You couldn't use that. But could almost use anything else.
Stan Lee got away with it, and he had a character in the city. He named him Clint, and he got away with it.
Because it maybe didn't bleed.
Yeah, well, until printing got better in the 90s, Now anything goes.
I can remember, speaking of printing, they had, during the time I was there, they changed the size of the boards.
Yes, they went from twice up to 1.5 times up.
Right, and they also took us, the whole staff, on a bus trip someplace. And it was to a lettering thing. They were going to get rid of all the letterers, and they were going to do lettering. This was going to be like typeset lettering. Do you remember that?
Charlton Comics. Did they take you to Derby, Connecticut?
I don't know where I went.
Because Charlton Comics, they had the credit in the comics was A Machine, machine, letter by A Machine, and what it was. In fact, I'm involved with some people who are doing a documentary about Charlton Comics.
Okay.
And we were in Derby, Connecticut, where they were headquartered, and we were giving a talk at the library and showing some clips, and there were several people who had worked there, which was great. But one woman stood up and said, "I used to work the giant typewriter." I was like, "Oh my God, you're A Machine!" So there was I think an Italian brand of typewriter that made this extra wide plan.
Yeah. I remember going there, and everybody from the lettering department was having puppies at the time, but it just didn't work for them. It lost the whole feeling because you were so used to seeing that.
And DC always had great letters. I mean, you had Ben Oda and
I think Walter was in it.
Walter, yeah.
I think he was a letterer too.
They
had such phenomenal people.
Gaspar
Saladino.
Gaspar Saladino, one of the greatest letterers of all time. He was the Todd Klein of his day. And I think Todd would be, humbled by that comparison.
Yeah.
He was just an amazing letterer.
Yes. I think Gaspar, if I'm not mistaken, did my wedding. He did the place sittings, the table cards.
Very. That's cool.
That just shows you it was a small shop. And they were family. They acted like family. They were spoiled children, jealous children. Yeah. They were family. And it was a nice, closed shop.
And there were maybe 30, 35 people on staff at the time. I mean, now, when I was at D.C., I left in 2006, and there were probably 350 people, across 5 floors in this building.
Which building was it? The Rockefeller Center building?
I started at 75 Rock.
Yeah.
But this was later on at the last place in the city on 1300 7th Avenue. 1700. Sold for 1700. Yeah. But we were right across from the Letterman Theater.
I took that little boy over there with the beard to, after he was about 4 or 5 years old, I took him to the place on 909.
Yeah.
Not 909, 75 Rock. and it was a huge, Jeanette.
Jeanette, yeah.
She was, or was it?
She started in 76.
Yeah. A little bit later, I took him. And Saul showed me around because he was now the head of, was he head of production? Or?
He was by then he was like, vice president or president.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
He showed me around. He treated me like I was a daughter. That's the relationship people had at the time.
Saul was a taskmaster. On the other hand, he also was a very generous, charitable man. He was in on the founding of the Special Olympics. He had grandchildren who were challenged, and so he helped build that up. He did a lot of charity work.
He had a
lot of tzedakah.
He had a son who was born with a brain injury.
Yeah.
And I remember this. He was the head of the Brain Damaged Foundation. I don't know if that morphed into something else, but we all went to a charity event in that honor, and the DC bought a whole table, and that's the nature of the relationships in the company. And he was so nice. When I was taking a vacation to London, he wanted me to interview, oh God, now I can't think of her name. She was Patricia Neal, because she had just had a bad stroke, and she was suffering, trying to get herself back. And he wanted me to go there and interview her and get her thoughts. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for me, but I will never forget the lengths that man went to help people, really.
Yeah, I miss that. It's again, when I started growing up around in the early 70s and first started writing for them in 75, that was also at 75 Rock.
Yes.
And it was just a very different atmosphere. It was just... it was before... I always describe the difference between Marvel and DC as Marvel looks like a comic book company, and DC looks like an insurance company with cooler stuff on the walls.
Well, I agree with you, but when I worked there, it really was not sophisticated in the sense that there were majestic offices. Mr. Leibowitz, who was the president of the company, he had this great office. Mr. Donenfeld had a little bit smaller office. And incidentally, you think DC stands for Detective Comics? It doesn't. It stands for Donenfeld Comics. That's what Mr. Donenfeld used to say.
I do not doubt that in the least.
I forgot my train of thought. So
it's okay. No, this is just let it wander. These are great. This is these. You were around some amazing people at an amazing time in their careers. The middle '60s was kind of the reawakening of comic books. The Batman TV show, Broadway. It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman went up on Broadway a year later.
Right.
So there was like this, and TV. There was even a couple of TV shows.
There was Batman that came out, which was tremendous.
Yeah. And so that had an effect on the comics. I mean, back then, a success. They were talking about canceling Detective Comics. I think because it fell under 500,000 copies. Now if you fall under 10,000, you're still okay. But it saved the comic books, and it brought attention back to comics. So all these people who would comics was only 25 years old at the time. They only really started 30 years old. They only really started in 1935.
Yeah.
So it was a baby. It was a brand new industry, and these were still the originators. These were still the guys who created it. So.
And when Marvel came out with their really majestic-looking heroes, that perked up our company tremendously because they knew they were hit in the face with something.
It took them a while, though. I mean,
it did.
The only person who I really saw respond in his work was Arnold Drake.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Arnold wrote the Doom Patrol. which was a very forward-thinking book for DC.
Yes.
It was very much a Marvel, kind of book, and nobody else was doing that stuff. I think, and I heard that the executives and the editors would sit around and go, yeah, whatever, because they were used to Marvel being the copycat garbage.
They didn't respond to it until they realized what it had become, which is par for the course for a lot of things. You don't realize it until it really hits you in the face.
Yeah, they've been master of the universe so long.
Right. When Warner Brothers came in, we suddenly got a real executive come into the company. He was really sharp. He wore really fine-cut suits.
Russ?
I don't remember his name. I remember his secretary's name because Felicia Maria Minet.
You're not talking about the guy who ran Warner Brothers. You're talking about somebody who...
He was like an executive something that came.
I remember he had like graying sideburns.
He looked like an executive.
I can't remember his name, but I remember I used to describe him as looking like a really well-dressed cardboard cutout.
He did, but even his secretary, Felicia, was, really high class.
Yeah.
Really.
I'll have to ask Paul Levitt. He'll remember.
Okay. Yeah.
This is fascinating. Does we've been. Obviously there are questions from the floor. Please.
I'm interested. The aesthetic of the romance comic lived beyond the era of romance comics, and you had things like Lichtenstein, who took panels and made fine art of them.
Right.
Even album covers and things with a girl with a tear and things like that. So, your thoughts of how it, went beyond the comics and really became part of pop culture?
I think it's wonderful that it did. The artist that they took that from was Tony Abruzzo, and I can see why. I think it was a little bit plagiarizing.
Sure.
I think it's a lot plagiarizing.
I don't know. I would love to have Tony's artwork only because I know how beautifully it was done and how carefully he loved the work. He was one person that did not like what was going on in the company. He really didn't. He didn't feel comfortable with getting yelled at. He was very sensitive, and he was wonderful at what he did. He didn't need criticism. And believe me, I never really criticized the man because I respected. You had to respect people who were giving you such beautiful work and cared. And I think that what killed the comic books was reality setting in, the war. People suddenly getting up and marching. It just was not a pretty time in the world. And grateful Roy Lichtenstein.
Did they ever, seeing these products made, think, hey, we should get in on that and make, like, romance calendars?
No.
Russ Heath certainly believes that now.
Well, sure.
I think you could. I think you could do something. I agree with you that something could be done.
Even if he had, even an after Irv Novick or after Tony Abruzzo or after, just their name and, a few bucks from whatever he got for them to the original artist wouldn't have been bad.
Yeah.
But, what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
So, but.
You can't. And they didn't do anything at the time that I know of. If you know something different, no. I don't know why they didn't. It was taken directly from his work.
Yeah. There's a lot of guys who resented it. I mean, and there are some, I guess, who took pride in it. It just never seemed fair to me. But anyway, anybody else? Come on, you can do it.
I have a question. Because I know DC got out of romance comics, and I don't think Marvel ever went into them, but why do you think Archie Comics stayed around so long, filling that? And would you even call those comics romantic or more like comedies? I'm just curious if you have opinions on that.
I think I used to love Archie when I was little, and I think it appeals. It doesn't take itself that seriously. It's a comedy show, and the people are pretty, and they're fun. and it gives you a little laugh while, they wink at you. And look what's happened to Archie now at Riverdale. Not the same Archie, of course, but life does go on, and Archie's still going on. I don't know how well are they.
I have a little blame to take for that because I wrote the first Archie series that it was still in the old school style, but we played it as a what if future might happen if he married Betty or if he married Veronica.
I think that's great.
And we did that series, and then when we were going to cancel it after 3 years, they said, "Well, let's kill Archie." So I killed Archie.
But you brought him back.
No,
Somebody brought him.
No, it's an alternate world, Archie. He doesn't have to come back.
That's true of comic books. People don't have to come back.
But they usually do. That's what's a problem with comics. It's like it takes the drama and suspense, out of the story. It's like, I saw the Avengers movie, and it's like all these characters are dying, and it's like, so what? They'll be back tomorrow. It's not. There's no emotional impact to this stuff without any real consequences.
It's true.
I think things like romance comics, even though it was usually a happy ending, there was still kind of consequences for the characters.
Okay, a typical romance story back then would be a girl loves a boy, but he doesn't notice her, so she does something to herself, puts on lipstick or something, teases her hair, and becomes that kind of a girl. And that's,
And that would be the title, That Kind of a Girl. Or
Love Never Comes Into My Heart. Something really soapy. And then you would want to know, she really became a tramp because she teased her hair, put on lipstick, and decided to kiss people. You can't do that anymore, right? But that was a story back then. There was another story which was wonderful about a girl who kissed a boy, and she had so many boyfriends, but each time she kissed him she realized something went out of the romance, and then finally she kissed the right boy and love flew in. So you can see that the plots were there, but they were limited to what you could say. Now you could say she got pregnant, almost that. Will she keep the baby? Will she give it away? I mean, do people really want to? That's so much like life. People don't want to read that anymore, right? Do you? No, you're here to escape life.
I guess it is. The romance stories are life idealized.
Yes, they're idealized. But I have to tell you that my continuing dramas were not like boy meets girl, boy kisses. There was a lot of stuff that happened to these ladies before they fell in love. That was the one thing that I did that was different. I had somebody bribe somebody. A woman was hiding the fact that she had a daughter. I mean,
it was Peyton Place, but
that was more Peyton-y than anything else.
Yeah. It's funny, you look back at the stuff that was, forbidden when it came out, like Peyton Place, and it's like, Jesus, how lame is that?
It's the book holds up. I just ran a class on the book, and she's the most underrated female writer in the American century.
Really?
Don't go by it. If you've not read the book and you've only seen the TV series or the movie, she was a phenomenal writer who wrote small town America like Winsburg, Ohio. You've never read the book.
I haven't read it since college.
I'm guilty.
So.
I haven't read it at all. I only go to the movies.
But I will. But I will definitely read that. Thank you. Yeah.
Were your continuing stories? Were they in one book, or was it over several months?
No, it was over several months, which was. I want to just show you. It was over several months. They continued. They finally got ended when, I think when Carmine took over, they were ended maybe 6 or 7 stories. But they went on for quite a while. There were 2 different versions of them. And I just want to point out something, a Saul Harrison thing. You see over here there's a checkerboard on top.
The go-go checks.
Yeah, the go-go checks. This one doesn't have it. Saul would go into a store look at magazines and realize they had something there that would strike you so that you knew that that was Glamour magazine or you knew that was Vogue magazine. So he's the one who came up with the checkerboard on that. Did you know that?
I did. I did. It didn't last very long.
No, it didn't.
A few months, and it's been entertaining since. Anybody else? Excuse me, what was that sign? 10 minutes. Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
I have
A file.
Do you think it's hard to keep romantic stories fresh? Because I'm thinking, like, obviously there's not comic stories, but something like Hallmark Channel will crank out all these stories, and they tend to get repetitive, especially over time. Do you think it's a challenge to come up with new ideas, or?
I don't think the people who watch and read that stuff want new ideas.
The answer is yes.
I think my mother could read. She would subscribe to these Harlequin book clubs, these romance novels. She would get 12 of them a week. She'd read 2 or 3 a day. She'd just sit there and read these things. And they were, the covers were different, and I'd flip through them, and it's like, Mom, what do you read? Whatever she read. But it was just, they were all the same, and that's what she liked. And when you look at a Hallmark thing, it's like, look, every story is boy meets girl. It could be boy meets atomic bomb. It could be boy meets, villain. But really, every story breaks down to that essential plot.
Yeah.
So, so there's always ways to keep it fresh. Depends on what your audience wants.
There was a successful comic book about 10 years ago that was a romance book. It was called Blankets. Craig Thompson.
Oh, yeah.
And it really, and I mean, he had a more independent art style. It wasn't that beautiful girl art style of the books of your era. But, it did well, and I think now it's more about personal stories. And I know that was actually a big thing did Simon and Kirby kind of invent the romance comic back in the 40s?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there were a lot of them, and they were sort of morphed into that. There were different, weren't there different titles?
Well, there were a lot of them, but with, I don't remember if it was Crestwood or whatever. Yeah, it was Joe Simon and Jack Kirby became publishers, and they published the first dedicated romance comics.
Yeah.
And within about 6 months, everybody was doing romance comics because they sold a couple of million copies.
Yeah.
And there were within, I think, 2 or 3 years, there were about 150 romance titles on the stands.
When I got there, DC had 5. That's it.
Wow.
And by the way, I helped kill romance comics because I had 2 stories in the last issue of Young Love that DC published. So.
What were the other titles? Young Love, Secret Love?
Falling in Love, Secret
Heartthrobs. Was Heartthrob?
Yes, Heartthrob. Girls' Romances, which was mine. Girls' Romances. See the cover? You recognize that cover?
And several of these were inherited, were taken over from like Quality.
Yes.
The numbering continued.
Yes,
Same with
they
GI
did.
Combat was another one that.
Would they ever use the inventory of the way they did with Quality?
Interesting. Listen to this.
Please.
When I got to work at DC, Erwin Donenfeld, who was the vice president, said to me, "Here are all these old pictures and, storyboards with ancient pictures." And they were ancient pictures. I think they were done during the 40s and 50s. He said, "You have to rewrite all of these and make them a different story." So yes, then he had the art department cut the skirts, but they were still old,
And they also did that with some of the humor stuff. I think they did it with Windy and.
They did it with my stuff because it went into other things. So they do.
Dobie Gillis became Windy and Willie or something like that, and they redid the hairstyles and the clothing.
Right. They hired somebody. They paid them a very minimal amount to do that because they paid me a very minimal amount.
Well, back then. It was minimal amount. I mean, publishing to begin with, you didn't go into publishing ever to get rich, and you didn't go into comic book publishing to even have an apartment of your own.
May I say something about that? When I was working there for a while, and I was, Mr. Donenfeld was the one who I had to deal with, I went into his office and I said, I'd like to have a raise. And he looked at me, he said, Barbara, you don't have a family, you don't have children, you live with your mother. You know, but this was not only to me. This was in any organization where there was a female who lived, you know, minimally with their mother or with whatever. And he didn't give me a raise, he wouldn't. But he gave me a little bit of a raise on my pages that I turned in.
But in those days, you know, I mean, when I started in 1975, my page rate at DC was $15.
Did you ever want to get into paperback romance after your experience in comics?
You know something? I had no idea what I wanted to get into. I wish I had kept up contacts. I did with some people. I'm going to show you this. Up your nose and out your ear. There were only 2 of these. Okay. There were only 2 of these that were published by Rosandro and Mike Esposito. And I wrote Thelma of the Apes and something else. And so, yes, I did want to do it, but I was also raising children at the time. And I was very stupid. That's all. I didn't know if I could do both. And, of course, you can do anything you want, ladies in the audience, and men, too. Yes? Do you want to ask a question?
Where are the children?
Well, they're the children.
Oh.
Over there. Those are my
So
grandchildren.
you're the one who held her back.
Well,
No,
there's
I'm
another
kidding.
one. The third one is the one with the icing on the cake. Are there any other questions?
Any other questions? Yes.
If you would like to look at this lookbook, you certainly may. It's the stuff that I did. I don't know if you... This is what you're talking about.
Yeah, but there were earlier ads that had been supposedly appearing in Showcase.
This just is my lookbook, which I put together and thought you might be interested in. So
Absolutely.
Please feel free to come and look at it. And I have some of the comic books that we spoke of here, if you want to look at those.
And you'll also be at a table in the dealers or in the artist alley, I assume?
I don't know about that.
Oh, okay. I assume you...
I have to go back to do an interview with somebody, but certainly I will be there for anybody that wants to see me.
And we also can look forward to an interview coming up with you in Alter Ego. I was talking to Roy Thomas before, and he mentioned that he's very excited about that upcoming interview with you. So.
Yes.
Well,
I also, may I just say,
ahead.
I also did an interview for Sequential Crush. I don't know if you know what that is, because I didn't. But there's other stuff in that, too, which you might be
That's
Nodell.
Nodell, yes.
Jackie.
Marty Nodell's granddaughter has she's a romance comics expert and aficionado. She recently published a book.
She's publishing a book. I think that interview is going to be in her book. She asked me, I said yes. But if it hadn't been for the picture on my back that my daughter found and gave to me, I would not have really Googled myself and found out what I did, because I thought that was a dead issue. Nothing ever dies on the internet.
Well, we ran into each other about 16 years ago at an antique show, and happened to start talking. And I, as I recall, I pretty much, you said I wouldn't know who you were,
right?
And I said, I know you're not Dorothy. I said, I know you're not Dorothy Woolfolk,
right?
So you must be Barbara Frielander,
right?
And did you know Dorothy? You ever know Dorothy?
No, but I can tell you that during the war, or slightly after the war, Zena Brody was the lady who was one of the editors of, there's a guy holding up that sign, one of the editors of the woman's book. So I really was not the first And I hope I won't be the last.
You're not. There have been many, many, many who have followed you since. So thank you.
But it's good to be a groundbreaker.
Absolutely. And thank you very much. This has been great.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed this very, very much. And you didn't scare me at all.
Tremendous conversation between Paul Kupperberg and Barbara Frielander. I hope you enjoyed today's romance literature class at Word Balloon 101 and enjoyed today's episode. It was all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Again, thank you, League, for your support. If you'd like to help the cause here at Word Balloon and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon or go to wordballoon.com. Thank you very much, League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon also brought to you by InStock Trades at InStockTrades.com, and there's some really great romance comics that are available at InStock Trades. I didn't mention Weird Love hardcover, Jailbird Romance, Jim Mooney among the artists in this one, and there's an introduction by Heidi MacDonald, but it's pretty crazy stuff. Some of the stories: Jailbird Romance, Never Love a Man with a Harem, Hobo Girl, I think I saw that movie, Innocence Was My Ankle, Backwards Romance, and I Tortured My In-Laws. Good stuff. And man, Jim Mooney, great Superman artist, Supergirl artist, and a Spider-Man artist as well. But again, watch him in his romantic element. I'm telling you, man, Vinnie Coletta, some of these other artists that are known for superhero stuff. John Romita Sr., an amazing romance artist. But to get Weird Love, it's 30% off, $20.99. Reach back for Simon & Kirby's first romance comics. You can get volumes 1 and 2 of Young Romance, the best of Simon & Kirby comics. It's 30% off, $20.99 for either Volume 1 or Volume 2. And then let's see, what else can we find? There's, again, Wally Wood's Torrid Romance. That is 50% off, $19.97. Some of the great books that are available at InStockTrades.com. Thanks again for listening to Word Balloon, and thank you, League of Word Balloon listeners, for the support. Word Balloon 101 will continue through the Labor Day weekend. I've got more things to post from Terrificon, and I can't wait to share them with you. That'll be coming up at the end of the week. So have a good one. Enjoy your holiday if you're already in that Labor Day week spirit, or, your last final days of summer before school kicks in. Happy to join you, and hope you're enjoying these conversations from Terrificon and other wonderful guests here at Word Balloon. Thanks for listening. Talk to you in a few days. Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions. Copyright 2018.